March 6, 1954, 10:45 a.m. Frederick Baird sees the shoe first. Brown leather, women's, lying in the dead grass near the outhouse on the abandoned Pickering school grounds. He's a Phoenixville firefighter, been searching for 3 days now with hundreds of others, soldiers, police, volunteers, all looking for the same person, 22-year-old Margarite Kyota, missing since Tuesday night. Frederick walks toward the outhouse. It's 150 feet from Valley Forge Road. Old, falling apart. The kind of structure you'd walk past without a second thought on any other day. But today he notices something. 2 of the boards have dark stains on them. He gets closer. The stains look wet. Look wrong. Look like blood. His hand reaches for the door. The metal handle is cold. He pulls. The door opens. He sees fabric first. Brown. A woman's coat. It's protruding from the cesspool inside. Just the edge of it, catching the morning light. Frederick looks down into the cesspool. Ice. Dark water. And legs, pointing up toward him. The body is encased in frozen water, her face down, her brown purse floating on top of her. The watch on her left wrist stopped at 1:25. This is the moment Phoenixville realizes they've been searching in the wrong places. The moment they understand that whoever took Margarite Kyota didn't just kill her. They wanted her to disappear, and for 71 years they succeeded. If you're fascinated by cold cases that went unsolved because of destroyed evidence and missing police files, cases where the system itself may have protected the killer, hit that subscribe button right now. This isn't just another unsolved murder from the 1950s. This is a story about what happens when evidence gets destroyed before the crime lab even arrives, when suspects disappear from official lists, when a coroner declares there were no suspicious circumstances in a murder case. Only people who think justice has an expiration date will scroll past this. Where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments below. Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, 1954. The kind of town where Philadelphia residents came to feel like they had been transported to the countryside. Small, quiet, safe. The kind of place where the biggest news was usually about the Phoenixville Ironworks, the massive factory that had drawn Eastern European immigrants for decades, families looking for work and a better life. The streets had names like Washington Avenue and Lincoln Avenue, churches on every corner, the Polish American Citizens Club where people danced on Tuesday nights, Valley Forge Army Hospital where soldiers recovered and nurses worked double shifts, where neighbours knew each other's families going back generations, where young women walked home alone at midnight without a second thought, because nothing bad happened in Phoenixville. Until March 3rd, 1954, when a scream shattered that illusion at 12:45 a.m., the residents of 361 Washington Avenue heard it, shrill, desperate, coming from the alley behind their house, then a scuffle, then silence. When they looked out their window, they saw a man walking out of that alley, carrying a woman under his arm like she weighed nothing, like she was a bag of groceries. She wasn't screaming, wasn't fighting. The man turned onto Lincoln Avenue and walked north into the darkness. 5 minutes earlier, that woman had been walking home from a dance. 5 minutes earlier, she'd been laughing with her friend Julia. 5 minutes earlier, she'd made a joke that would turn out to be horrifyingly prophetic. I need you to comment the exact time you're watching this. I need to see how many people are uncovering this past midnight when Margarite was taken. Then drop your location below. The reason why will become clear in the next few minutes, and it's going to make you look at your hometown completely differently, because someone in Phoenixville knew who killed Margarite Kyota. Someone always knows. And for 71 years, that knowledge has been buried under destroyed evidence and missing files. Someone in your town might know too. Margarite Kyota was the baby of the family, the youngest of 7 children born to Wasil and Theodosia Kyota, immigrants whose surname had been anglicized from Kotik when they came to America seeking work at the iron factory. Her 6 older siblings adored her, not in the way that breeds resentment or spoils a child, but in the way that creates genuine closeness. Even as an adult, even at 22, Margarite spent time with all her siblings. Sunday dinners that stretched into evenings, garden work where she'd pick vegetables with her nephew Bill, who was only 9 years younger than her. They'd climb out the bathroom window onto the roof of the family home to sunbathe together, aunt and nephew more like siblings themselves. She worked as a secretary at the BFG Goodrich tire plant in nearby Oaks. Took the same route every day, knew the same people, lived the kind of steady, unremarkable life that most people build in small towns. But Margarite had something that stuck in people's memories even decades later. Kindness. Not the performative kind. Not the kind you mention to get credit. The real kind that shows up in small moments. The kind her nephew Bill Gore would remember 70 years later when he talked about the aunt who treated him like an equal, who never made him feel like just a kid. The kind that makes a murder feel even more senseless. March 2nd, 1954 was a Tuesday, an unusual night for going out, but it was the night before Ash Wednesday, and in the Byzantine Catholic community Margarite belonged to, that meant one last night of celebration before Lent began. Margarite went to 2 dances that night with friends, first the Valley Forge Army Hospital, then the Polish American Citizens Club on the north side of Phoenixville. She left around midnight with her friend Julia Potasniak, who worked with Ard, her at the tire plant. They walked together for 30 minutes, talking, laughing. the way young women do when they're 22 and the night is ending and tomorrow is just another Wednesday. At the intersection of Gay and Morgan Streets, they had to go different ways. Before they parted, Margaret said something strange to Julia. "If you don't see me in the morning, look for me in Burns Alley." Burns Alley ran behind the Kyota family home. Julia laughed. It seemed like a joke. Neither of them understood what it meant. Neither of them ever would. It was 12:40 a.m. Marguerite had 5 minutes left to live. She had no idea she'd just said goodbye to the last person who would see her alive. The walk from Gay and Morgan Streets to the Kyota family home on Burns Alley should have taken Marguerite 8 minutes, maybe 10 if she walked slowly. If she stopped to look at something, if she took her time because the night was mild for early March and she wasn't in a hurry to get home, she never made it. But someone saw what happened to her. 2 witnesses, actually. The first lived at 361 Washington Avenue. They heard the scream at 12:45 a.m., shrill, terrified, the kind of sound that makes your blood stop. Then sounds of a scuffle in the alley behind their house. Then nothing. When they looked out their window, they saw him, a man, walking out of the alley, carrying a woman under his arm, her body limp, not fighting, not screaming, just limp. He walked toward Lincoln Avenue, turned onto it, headed north. The witness across the street saw the same thing, but they saw something else too, a dark sedan, coming back up Lincoln Avenue moments later. It turned right onto Washington Avenue and stopped directly across from the alley where the man had emerged with the woman. The man got out of the car, went back into the alley, picked something up, got back in the car, drove west on Washington Avenue. The witness couldn't tell if there were other people in the car, couldn't see the license plate, couldn't identify the man's face in the darkness. But they knew what they'd seen, an abduction, in Phoenixville, on a Tuesday night. When Marguerite didn't come home that night, her family knew immediately that something was wrong. This wasn't like her. She didn't stay out. She didn't go to friends' houses without telling anyone. She was responsible, predictable, safe. Bill Gore was 13 years old, living in Philadelphia with his parents. He remembers his mother leaving their home the moment she heard her baby sister was missing. Remembers the panic in her voice, the way she moved faster than he'd ever seen her move. The Phoenixville Police Department organized search parties immediately. This was a small town. Everyone knew the Kyota family, everyone knew Margaret, and everyone was terrified because the witnesses had come forward, had told police what they'd seen, a woman matching Margaret's description being carried away by a man, unconscious or dead, taken in a dark sedan. In the 1950s, before DNA evidence, before surveillance cameras, before cell phone tracking, police had to rely on witnesses and physical evidence and luck. They didn't have much of any of those things. The search parties covered a 16-mile radius around Phoenixville. Police officers, firefighters, soldiers from Valley Forge Army Hospital, volunteers from the community, people who'd known Marguerite her whole life, searching fields and wooded areas and abandoned buildings. Those who couldn't search went to church to pray. The search continued for 3 days. 3 days of hoping she was alive somewhere. Injured maybe? Confused, but alive. 3 days of checking every barn, every abandoned house, every place someone could hide a person. 3 days of the Kyota family waiting for news that never came. On Saturday, March 6th, 2 companies from the National Guard joined the search. That's when Frederick Baird found the shoe. But here's what nobody knew yet, what wouldn't become clear until much later. What would change everything about how this case was investigated. The crime scene was being destroyed before the crime lab even arrived. The outhouse where Margaret's body was found was immediately torn down, not after the crime scene was processed. Not after photographs were taken and evidence was collected and samples were preserved. Immediately. They had to remove it to get her body out of the cesspool. That part makes sense. But what happened next doesn't. The outhouse was taken apart completely, disposed of, gone, before the police crime lab team from Philadelphia could make it to the scene. Those bloodstains Frederick Baird had seen on 2 of the boards, never analysed, never tested, never preserved. Gone. And this matters more than you might think. Because when the medical examiner performed Marguerite's autopsy, he discovered something crucial about how she died. She'd been stabbed 3 times in the left side of her chest. The wounds caused massive internal bleeding, a hemothorax that filled her chest cavity with blood. But almost none of that blood was external. There was no blood on Margaret's clothing, no blood at the crime scene where her body was found. The bleeding was almost entirely internal. So if those stains on the outhouse boards were blood, and Frederick Baird was a firefighter, he knew what blood looked like. They almost certainly didn't come from Marguerite. They came from someone else, possibly her killer. If those boards had been preserved, if samples had been taken, if they'd been stored properly for even a few decades until DNA testing became available in the 1980s and 1990s, the case might have been solved, but the boards were destroyed, and with them, potentially the only physical evidence that could have identified Marguerite's killer. This wasn't the only evidence that vanished. According to multiple sources, including interviews with police chiefs and investigators over the decades, numerous documents went missing from the case file. A list of 25 potential suspects, gone. When Pennsylvania State Police reviewed the case years later, rumors spread through Phoenixville that the list had been disposed of because one of the suspects was a prominent member of the community, someone who didn't want to be associated with the murder investigation, someone with the power to make evidence disappear. There's no proof of this, no one has ever confirmed it, but the list is still missing. And then there's the question of jurisdiction. Technically, the Pennsylvania State Police should have been the primary investigative agency on this case. Margarite went missing in one township. Her body was found in another. State police had jurisdiction, but somehow the Phoenixville Police Department, a small town force with limited resources and staff, became the primary agency instead. Why? In 1990, journalists tracked down Fred K. McInnes, who had been the Phoenixville police chief in 1954. He was 82 years old, living in a retirement home. They asked him why the case had been assigned to his department instead of the state police. He couldn't remember, couldn't recall the circumstances at all. Whoever killed Margarite Kyota counted on evidence being destroyed, counted on files going missing, counted on a small town police department being overwhelmed, counted on people forgetting. They counted on you scrolling past this story. If you're not like the person who stabbed a 22-year-old woman 3 times and threw her in a cesspool to die, if you believe Margarite Kyota deserved better than destroyed evidence and missing suspect lists, hit subscribe right now. Only people who think it's acceptable to let killers hide behind lost files and destroyed crime scenes won't subscribe. Show that coward who killed Margarite that the world is still watching, that we don't forget, that destroying evidence doesn't make you smart. It makes you a coward who couldn't even face justice. And if you believe the system that destroyed that evidence before the crime lab arrived should be held accountable, if you believe someone in Phoenixville knows something they've never told, comment, "Justice for Margarite," right now. Because here's what's going to disturb you even more. That destroyed evidence and those missing files, they're just the beginning of how badly this case was mishandled. Deputy Coroner Cooper T. Bishop filed a document on March 31st, 1954, listing a coroner's inquest into Margarite's death as pending, a public inquest, the kind of hearing where evidence is examined officially, where witnesses testify under oath, where everything gets documented in a permanent public record, the kind of hearing that creates an official evidence trail that future investigators can review. Chief McInnes and Deputy Coroner Bishop both stated publicly that this hearing would be held. 2 weeks later, Bishop filed a different document. This one said that a public inquest was not necessary because there were no lawful violence or suspicious circumstances attending the death of said decedent. Read that again. No suspicious circumstances. Margarite Kyota was abducted off a street in Phoenixville, stabbed 3 times, thrown into a cesspool while still breathing. They found water from the cesspool in her airway, meaning she was alive when she went into that freezing water. Her watch stopped at 1:25 a.m., and the deputy coroner declared there were no suspicious circumstances. By the time this document was reported publicly in 1990, Cooper T. Bishop was dead, so there was no way to ask him what the hell he was thinking when he filed it, no way to ask what pressure he was under, what he was told, what mistakes led to one of the most absurd official statements in Pennsylvania criminal history. The public inquest never happened, which means there's no official record of all the evidence available in 1954, no testimony preserved, no comprehensive documentation that could have helped investigators decades later, just missing files and destroyed evidence and a deputy coroner's statement that defies basic logic. The investigation continued anyway. Police interviewed every man Margarite had danced with on March 2nd, every man they could find who had danced with her at previous USO dances at the Army Hospital. Because of the ironworks and the Army Hospital, many people who'd been in Phoenixville in early 1954 left town in the following years. Investigators travelled across the country to track them down, to interview them, to eliminate them as suspects, or develop them into persons of interest. Numerous suspects were developed over the years, just as many were eliminated, but 3 names kept coming up in the rumour mill around Phoenixville: a doctor, a police officer, and a third man whose identity was never made public. The doctor became a suspect because of rumours that bloodstains had been seen in the backseat of his car around the time of the murder. But remember, Margarite's stab wounds caused almost exclusively internal bleeding. No blood got on her clothing, which means it almost certainly wouldn't have left large stains in whatever car she was transported in. The police officer became a suspect for a different reason. He'd seen Margarite and Julia just before the 2 women parted ways at the intersection of Gay and Morgan Streets. He'd been out walking his dog at 12:40 a.m, but here's the problem with him as a suspect. He would have had less than 5 minutes to walk home, get his dog inside, get his car out of his garage, drive it several blocks to park it on Lincoln Avenue, and then walk to the alley on Washington Avenue where Margarite was attacked at 12:45. According to Dan Barrow and Joe Winnick, 2 Phoenixville residents who spent years researching the case and reviewing the police files, this would have been physically impossible. The timeline doesn't work. The police officer spoke about Margarite's death. Shortly before his own death in the late 1980s, he said he hadn't killed her, that he was simply haunted by her tragic death like so many people in Phoenixville were. The doctor eventually disappeared to Florida. By 1975, Phoenixville Police Chief Joseph Kane said he believed this man was a strong suspect. The doctor's occupation meant he could have had access to the murder weapon, because the outside experts Chief Caney consulted had examined the autopsy findings and reached a conclusion about what killed Margarite: a double-sided surgeon's awl, a specialized medical instrument, the kind of thing a doctor would have access to, the kind of thing that would cause the exact type of wounds found on Margarite's body. But the Phoenixville Police Department didn't have the resources to travel to Florida to track down this suspect, didn't have the budget to go to Puerto Rico to investigate another potential suspect who had since committed suicide, so the investigation stalled again. What nobody knew yet was that the case had one more devastating turn, one more way the system would fail Margaret and her family. But that wouldn't become clear for another 44 years. Bill Gore's mother had a nervous breakdown after Margarite was murdered. Her baby sister, the one she'd helped raise, the one she'd watched grow from a child into a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, gone, and no one could tell her why. She spent the rest of her life talking about Margarite, wondering about her, missing her. In 1998, shortly before she died, she told Bill something that stays with him even now. Nobody has done anything, and I'm ready to die. I don't know what happened. I want somebody to tell me something. She died without answers. So did Margarite's parents. So did all 6 of her older siblings. An entire generation of the Kyota family lived with the knowledge that someone had killed the youngest member of their family and gotten away with it, that someone was walking around free while Margarite was in the ground, that all the evidence that might have identified that person had been destroyed or lost or deliberately hidden. In 1975, Police Chief Joseph Kane said an arrest in Margarite's case could be imminent. It wasn't. The following year, he said the department had 2 main suspects: the doctor who'd disappeared to Florida, the man who'd committed suicide in Puerto Rico. Neither lead went anywhere. The case went cold again. And this is what becomes clear when you look at the full timeline of the investigation. The case wasn't unsolved because police didn't try. Individual officers and chiefs spent years, decades working on it, travelling to interview witnesses, developing suspects, following leads. The case was unsolved because the initial crime scene was destroyed, because evidence went missing, because a public inquest that should have created an official record never happened, because a small-town police department was given jurisdiction over a case that needed state resources. The case was unsolved because the system failed, and when the system fails, killers go free. But the story you've heard so far, that's just the beginning, because what happened to the investigation in the decades after 1954 reveals something even more disturbing about how cold cases get handled in America. Let's talk about what investigators actually had to work with. 2 witnesses who saw a man carrying a woman out of an alley at 12:45 a.m. on March 3rd, 1954. The woman wasn't struggling, wasn't screaming. The man put her in a dark sedan and drove away. The timing fits perfectly. Margarite and Julia parted ways at 12:40 a.m. 5 minutes later, witnesses heard a scream and saw the abduction. Margarite's watch stopped at 1:25 a.m. That gives us a 40-minute window between when she was taken and when her watch stopped. 40 minutes that could tell us where she was taken, where she was killed, where her body was hidden. The abandoned Pickering School grounds where her body was found were 2 miles south of where she was abducted. In 1954, without modern roads, that's about a 5-minute drive. So what happened during the other 35 minutes? Here's what the medical examiner determined. Margaret was stabbed 3 times in the left side of her chest with what experts later identified as a double-sided surgeon's awl. The wounds caused massive internal hemorrhaging. She also had superficial abrasions on the left side of her neck and the right side of her face, consistent with being grabbed, restrained. She had not been sexually assaulted. This detail matters because it changes the motive. This wasn't a crime of sexual violence. This was something else. Rage, a personal vendetta, silencing someone who knew something. Water from the cesspool was found in Margarite's airway. She was alive when she went into that water, alive when her killer threw her into that freezing cesspool and walked away. Her brown purse was found floating on top of her. The clothes she'd been wearing to the dances were still on her body. Nothing was taken. No robbery, no sexual assault, just murder. And here's what made detectives realize early on that this wasn't random. Margaret told Julia to look for her in Burns Alley if she didn't show up to work the next morning. Why would she say that? The most common theory among investigators over the years, Margarite had plans to meet someone in that alley before she went inside her house. Someone she knew, someone she trusted enough to meet alone at almost 1 a.m., someone who knew she'd be walking home alone that night. But if that's true, why was she attacked on Washington Avenue instead of Burns Alley? Did someone else intercept her before she could reach her planned meeting? Did the person she planned to meet change locations? Did she mention Burns Alley to Julia as a joke about something else entirely? And the fact that she was killed is just a horrifying coincidence? We don't know. What we do know is that investigators developed a list of 25 suspects, men who knew Margarite, men who had access to her schedule, men who would have known she was walking home alone that night. That list is gone now, but 2 men from that list have been identified in various reports over the decades. The doctor who disappeared to Florida, who had access to surgical instruments, whose car allegedly had bloodstains in the back seat, who Chief Kane in 1975 said was a strong suspect, and the man who committed suicide in Puerto Rico, about whom we know almost nothing because the files are incomplete. Dan Barrow and Joe Winnick, the 2 Phoenixville residents who researched the case extensively in the 1980s and 1990s, claimed they could confidently eliminate both the doctor and the police officer as suspects based on the evidence in the available files, but they never published their research, never wrote the book they'd planned. Their findings, whatever specific evidence they'd uncovered, are lost to time, so we're left with the same questions that haunted investigators for decades. Who knew Margaret would be walking home alone that night? Who had access to a surgeon's awl? who had a motive to kill her, and most importantly, who had the power or connections to make evidence disappear from a police station. Look at what happened here. Look at how evidence got destroyed before the crime lab arrived, how a suspect list with 25 names went missing, how a coroner declared no suspicious circumstances in a murder case. If you can't stand how this investigation was handled, if you believe evidence should be preserved, not destroyed to protect prominent community members, comment, "The system failed Margarite," right now. Let the Phoenixville Police Department know that 71 years later, people are still paying attention, that we haven't forgotten, that destroying evidence doesn't make a case go away. Only people who benefit from corrupted investigations, only people who think it's acceptable to throw away evidence that might solve a murder will scroll past this. Prove you're better. Comment below, because what I'm about to tell you about how this case has been handled in recent decades is going to make you even angrier, and you need to channel that anger into action. The Kyota family has been asking for answers for 71 years. The least we can do is make noise. Make sure this case doesn't get buried deeper. Comment, "Justice for Margarite," if you agree. In 1990, 36 years after Margarite's murder, reporters from the Philadelphia Inquirer started looking into the case. They interviewed retired police chief Fred McInnes, who was 82 and living in a retirement home. They tracked down witnesses, they reviewed what was left of the case files, and they discovered something that changed how people understood the investigation. The evidence hadn't just been mishandled by accident. Multiple people involved in the original investigation had made decisions that ensured key evidence would never be available to future investigators. The outhouse was dismantled and disposed of before the crime lab arrived, not because it was standard procedure, but because someone made the decision to do it that way. The public coroner's inquest was cancelled with a statement declaring no suspicious circumstances, not because of an administrative error, but because Deputy Coroner Cooper T. Bishop filed official paperwork to that effect. The suspect list with 25 names went missing from the Phoenixville police files, not because of poor record keeping over time, but according to rumours, because someone removed it deliberately. The case was assigned to the small Phoenixville Police Department instead of the state police, not because of a jurisdictional misunderstanding, but because someone made that decision, and even the police chief who was in charge at the time couldn't remember why. Each of these decisions, viewed individually, could be explained as mistakes, accidents, oversights common in 1954 when forensic science was less developed, but viewed together they form a pattern of evidence being destroyed, hidden, or made unavailable, a pattern that suggests someone wanted this case to remain unsolved. When reporters published their findings in 1990, people in Phoenixville started talking openly about something many had suspected for decades, that one of the suspects on that missing list had been protected by someone in power. Maybe a relative, maybe a friend, maybe someone with political connections, someone who ensured that the evidence that might have identified them would never make it to trial. This is speculation. There's no proof. No one has ever been charged with obstruction of justice in Margarite's case, but the pattern remains. And the Kyota family has spent 71 years living with the knowledge that someone got away with murder, possibly because someone else helped them get away with it. Bill Gore is in his 80s now. He was 13 when his Aunt Margarite was murdered. He spent more than 70 years missing her, wondering what happened to her, hoping for answers that never came. His mother died in 1998, still haunted by her baby sister's death, still wondering who killed her, still angry that no one could tell her anything. All 6 of Margarite's siblings died without knowing who killed their youngest sister. Her parents died without justice, and Bill Gore, now the oldest living person who remembers Margarite Kyota as a real person rather than a cold case, carries that weight alone. He's not looking for vengeance. The killer is almost certainly dead by now. It's been 71 years. Even if they were only 25 in 1954, they'd be 96 now. Bill just wants to know. He wants to know who killed his aunt and why. He wants to know if the rumours were true, if someone in Phoenixville really did protect the killer. He wants to know if that missing suspect list still exists somewhere, hidden in someone's attic or safety deposit box. He wants to know if the destroyed outhouse boards were really an accident or a cover-up. He wants answers, not for closure. Bill is honest about that. Knowing who killed Margarite won't bring her back, won't erase 71 years of pain, won't give his mother the peace she deserved before she died, but it will mean something. It will mean that destroying evidence doesn't work forever. It will mean that covering up for killers doesn't guarantee they'll never be named. It will mean that Margarite Kyota mattered enough for someone to keep digging even after 71 years. The case is still officially open. The Phoenixville Police Department still maintains the file. What's left of it anyway? DNA technology exists now that didn't exist in 1954. If those outhouse boards had been preserved, if samples had been taken from those bloodstains Frederick Baird saw, modern testing could potentially identify whose blood it was, but the boards are gone. If the suspect list still existed, modern investigators could track down the descendants of those 25 men, could ask questions, could potentially find someone who remembers their father or grandfather acting strangely in March 1954, but the list is gone. If the public coroner's inquest had been held as originally planned, there would be an official record of every piece of evidence available in 1954, every witness statement, every forensic finding. Future investigators would have a complete picture of what police knew and when they knew it, but the inquest never happened. So modern investigators are left with incomplete files, destroyed evidence, and a 71-year-old trail that's gone cold. But here's what they do have. They have Bill Gore, who's willing to talk to anyone who will listen about his aunt. They have Dan Barrow and Joe Winnick's research from the 1990s, even if it was never formally published. They have newspaper archives from 1954 with witness statements that might contain details not in the police files. They have descendants of other witnesses, other suspects, other people who were in Phoenixville in March 1954 and might remember something their parents or grandparents mentioned. They have you. Everyone watching this video, everyone who's made it this far, everyone who's angry about destroyed evidence and missing files and a coroner who declared no suspicious circumstances in a murder case. Because here's the thing about cold cases, they don't get solved by police alone. They get solved when someone sees a documentary or reads an article and remembers something their grandmother said. They get solved when someone finds old letters in an attic and realizes they're relevant to a crime. They get solved when enough people care enough to keep asking questions, keep demanding answers, keep refusing to let the case be buried and forgotten. Margarite Kyota has been in the ground for 71 years. Her killer has never been named, but that doesn't mean they never will be. There was no trial in Margarite's case, no courtroom drama, no jury deliberation, no judge reading a verdict, just decades of dead ends and destroyed evidence and questions that multiplied faster than answers. But absence of justice is its own kind of verdict. When a killer is never caught, the community delivers the verdict themselves. And in Phoenixville, that verdict has been whispered for 71 years. Everyone has their theory about who killed Margarite Kyota, the doctor who disappeared to Florida, the police officer who saw her minutes before she died, the unnamed man from the missing suspect list, someone else entirely, a stranger passing through town, a soldier from the army hospital, a transient worker at the iron factory. In small towns, unsolved murders become mythology. Facts blur into speculation. Speculation hardens into certainty, and certainty gets passed down through generations until no one remembers which parts are true. Bill Gore has heard all the theories. He's listened to neighbours and family friends and amateur sleuths tell him they know who killed his aunt, that it was definitely this person, or that person, or someone else entirely. None of them have proof. None of them can explain why evidence was destroyed. None of them can account for the missing suspect list or the cancelled inquest or the jurisdictional irregularities. They just know, or they think they know, or they want to believe they know because the alternative, that no one knows, that no one will ever know, is too disturbing to accept. The investigation continued sporadically over the decades. Different police chiefs made renewed efforts to solve the case, sent officers to interview old witnesses, reviewed files for details that might have been missed, consulted with forensic experts about the murder weapon and the autopsy findings. In 1975, Chief Caney said an arrest could be imminent. It wasn't. In the 1990s, Dan Barrow and Joe Winnick spent years researching the case. They claimed they could eliminate certain suspects definitively. They talked about writing a book. They never did. In 2008, the case got renewed attention when a local historian started documenting Phoenixville's history and included Margarite's murder as one of the defining events of the 1950s. Each time, there's a surge of interest. People pay attention for a few weeks or months. Then the case fades again. But the Kyota family never stops paying attention. They never stop hoping someone will come forward with information. They never stop wondering if the person who knows what happened to Margarite is still alive, still in Phoenixville, still keeping the secret. Here's what we know for certain about the night Margarite died. She left the Polish American Citizens Club at midnight on March 3rd, 1954. She walked home with Julia Potasniak. They parted ways at 12:40 a.m. at the intersection of Gay and Morgan Streets. 5 minutes later, at 12:45 a.m., witnesses heard a scream and saw a man carrying a woman out of an alley on Washington Avenue. The man put the woman in a dark sedan and drove away. He came back moments later, retrieved something from the alley and drove west on Washington Avenue. Margarite's body was found 3 days later in an outhouse cesspool at the abandoned Pickering School grounds, 2 miles south of Phoenixville. She'd been stabbed 3 times with a surgeon's awl. Her watch had stopped at 1:25 a.m. She was alive when she went into the water. She had not been sexually assaulted. Nothing was taken from her purse. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was not a random attack by a stranger. This was targeted. Someone who knew Margarite, knew her schedule, knew she'd be walking home alone that night, knew the route she'd take, had a weapon ready, had a vehicle ready, had a plan for where to dispose of her body. Someone who thought they'd gotten away with it, and for 71 years they have. But here's what haunts investigators and the Kyota family more than anything else. The evidence that might have solved this case existed once. The outhouse boards with bloodstains, the complete suspect list, the testimony that would have been given at the public coroner's inquest, the forensic analysis that should have been done by the Philadelphia crime lab before the crime scene was destroyed. All of it existed. All of it was lost or destroyed or deliberately hidden, and that means someone made choices that ensured this case would never be solved. Maybe those choices were innocent mistakes. Maybe they were standard procedure in 1954 that seems negligent now. Maybe different people made different bad decisions that happened to compound into catastrophic consequences. Or maybe someone was protecting the killer, we'll probably never know which, but the pattern remains, and patterns don't usually form by accident. The impact on the Phoenixville community was profound and lasting. For decades, people talked about being afraid to walk alone at night. Mothers wouldn't let their daughters walk home from dances. The town that had been safe and quiet and trusting became suspicious and fearful. The murder changed Phoenixville's identity from a pastoral escape from Philadelphia to a place where a young woman could be snatched off the street and murdered, and her killer could vanish without a trace. Churches held vigils for Margarite on the anniversary of her death for years. Local newspapers published updates on the investigation every few years. The case became part of the town's collective memory, the tragedy everyone knew about, everyone had theories about, but no one could solve. And through it all, the Kyota family endured. They buried Margarite in the local cemetery. They visited her grave. They kept her memory alive. They raised their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren with stories about the aunt who was kind and gentle and loved sunbathing on the roof and working in the garden. They never forgot. They never stopped hoping for justice. Even now, even after 71 years, even after everyone who knew Margarite personally is dead or dying, her family still wants answers, not for vengeance. Justice in the traditional sense is no longer possible. Even if the killer were identified today, they're almost certainly dead. But Bill Gore speaks for all of Margarite's surviving relatives when he says they want to know who killed her and why. They want to know if their suspicions about the investigation were correct, if someone really did destroy evidence to protect the killer. They want to know if the missing suspect list is hidden somewhere, if someone's child or grandchild has it in a box in their basement and doesn't realize its significance. They want to know if anyone in Phoenixville still alive today knows something they've never told. Because somewhere, someone knows. In a town that small, in a case that prominent, someone always knows. Maybe it's a deathbed confession that was never reported to police. Maybe it's a family secret that's been kept for 3 generations. Maybe it's a detail someone witnessed that night that they didn't think was important at the time, but the information exists. It's out there. And the Kyota family believes that if enough people hear Margarite's story, if enough people share it, if enough people start asking questions in Phoenixville and surrounding communities, eventually that information will surface. After 71 years, we still don't know who killed Margarite Kyota. Why was she targeted specifically? Was it personal? Did she know something dangerous? Did she reject someone's advances? Was she mistaken for someone else? What did her cryptic comment to Julia about Burns Alley mean? Was it a joke? Was she planning to meet someone there? Did she have a premonition something bad was going to happen? Who were the 25 suspects on the missing list? Where is that list now? Did it really contain the name of someone prominent who was being protected? Were the bloodstains on the outhouse boards really blood? If so, whose? The killers? Some unrelated persons? Why was the crime scene destroyed so quickly? Was it incompetence? Standard procedure for 1954, or deliberate evidence destruction? Who made the decision to cancel the public coroner's inquest? What prompted Deputy Coroner Cooper T. Bishop to file paperwork declaring no suspicious circumstances? Why was the Phoenixville Police Department given jurisdiction instead of the state police? Who made that decision? What was the reasoning? Did the doctor who disappeared to Florida really have blood in his car? Was that rumor based on fact or small-town speculation? Could the police officer who saw Margarite minutes before she died have committed the crime despite the tight timeline? Or is there something wrong with the timeline as we understand it? Who was the man who committed suicide in Puerto Rico that Chief Caney mentioned as a suspect? What connected him to the case? What did Dan Barrow and Joe Winnick discover in their research that made them confident they could eliminate certain suspects? Why didn't they publish their findings? Is there anyone still alive in Phoenixville who knows more than they've told? These questions have haunted investigators for 7 decades. Some may never be answered. The passage of time has ensured that many witnesses, suspects, and people with knowledge of the case are now dead, but some questions still could be answered if the right person came forward, if someone found old documents in their deceased relatives' belongings, if someone finally decided to share a family secret they've been keeping, if someone remembered a conversation they overheard as a child that didn't make sense until now. Cold cases get solved all the time. The Golden State Killer case was solved in 2018 using genetic genealogy, 40 years after the crimes. Other cases have been solved through deathbed confessions, through old evidence being retested with new technology, through witnesses finally coming forward after decades of silence. Margarite's case could still be solved. The evidence that exists, the incomplete police files, the autopsy report, the witness statements from 1954, the newspaper archives, could still yield new insights if reviewed with fresh eyes and modern investigative techniques. Genetic genealogy could potentially be used if any biological evidence from the killer still exists somewhere in storage, even though the most promising evidence, those outhouse boards, was destroyed. Someone in Phoenixville might still remember something crucial. The case is still open. The Phoenixville Police Department still maintains the file. They're still willing to investigate new leads. All they need is for someone to come forward with information. All they need is for one person to break their silence. Whoever killed Margarite Kyota wanted her forgotten, wanted the case to fade, wanted time and destroyed evidence to erase any possibility of justice. They wanted Margarite to become just another statistic, just another unsolved cold case that no one talks about anymore. If you believe Margarite Kyota mattered, if you believe we must remember so this doesn't keep happening, smash that like button and subscribe right now, because here's what the killer didn't count on: technology, genetic genealogy, modern forensic techniques, and people who refuse to let cold cases die. People People like you who've watched this for over an hour because you believe justice matters even after 71 years. The Kyota family has been waiting for answers since 1954. The least we can do is make sure Margarite's story reaches as many people as possible, that someone in Phoenixville or someone whose grandparents lived there in 1954 sees this and remembers something crucial. Subscribe if you believe every murder victim deserves to have their killer named even 7 decades later. Like this video if you believe evidence destruction should never be the reason a case goes unsolved. Only people who think it's fine to let killers hide behind destroyed evidence and missing files will refuse to engage. Which side are you on? Prove it below. Margarite Kyota was 22 years old when she died. She worked as a secretary at a tyre plant. She was close with her family. She liked sunbathing on the roof with her nephew. She was kind and gentle, and everyone who knew her remembered her decades after her death. She went to 2 dances on March 2nd, 1954 because it was the night before Ash Wednesday and her community celebrated before the somber season of Lent began. She walked home with her friend Julia. They talked and laughed. They parted ways at 12:40 a.m. at the intersection of Gay and Morgan Streets. 5 minutes later, someone grabbed her, stabbed her 3 times, threw her in an outhouse cesspool to die. And for 71 years that person's name has remained unknown. This case represents everything frustrating about cold case investigations. Evidence destroyed, files missing, witnesses dead, time erasing memories and opportunities. But it also represents something important about how we treat murder victims and their families. The Kyota family never gave up, never stopped hoping for answers, never let Margarite be forgotten even when the investigation stalled, even when suspects died, even when evidence was destroyed. They kept her memory alive through 2 generations, 3 generations, now 4 generations of descendants who never met her but know her story. That matters. Remembering matters. Because if we forget, if we let time and destroyed evidence and bureaucratic failures erase victims from our collective memory, we're sending a message that some murders don't matter enough to solve, that some victims don't deserve justice. Margarite deserved better than she got in 1954. She deserved a thorough investigation with preserved evidence and proper jurisdiction, and a public inquest that created a permanent record. She deserved to have her killer caught and prosecuted and named publicly so her family would have answers. She didn't get any of that. But we can still give her something. We can make sure her story is told, that people know what happened to her, that the failures in her case are documented so they don't happen to future victims. We can make sure that 71 years from now, someone still remembers that Margarite Kyota mattered, that her life had value, that her death should never have gone unavenged. The case is still open. Information can still be submitted to the Phoenixville Police Department at 484-924-0706. If you're from Phoenixville, if your parents or grandparents lived there in 1954, if you've heard stories about this case, if you found old documents or letters that might be relevant, contact them. If you have any information about who killed Margarite Kyota, now is the time to come forward. Time is running out. The people who were adults in 1954 are nearly all gone now. The window for solving this case through witness testimony and confession is closing, but it hasn't closed yet. Someone out there knows something, and maybe, if this video reaches the right person, if the algorithm pushes it to someone whose grandmother lived in Phoenixville, if someone finally decides to break a family silence that's been kept too long, maybe we'll finally get answers. Maybe Bill Gore will finally learn who killed his aunt before he dies. Maybe Margarite's case will finally be solved. Maybe justice, even 71 years late, will finally arrive. The case of Deborah Lindsley in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania involves a young nurse who disappeared after her shift in 1975, and the police officer who became the prime suspect but was never charged. That investigation is even more disturbing than this one because of who helped cover it up. Click that video right now to see what happens when the people supposed to investigate murders are the ones committing them. Before you go, Phoenixville Police Department 484-924-706. If you know anything at all, about who killed Margarite Kyota, call them. Even the smallest detail could finally solve this case after 71 years. Margarite Kyota, 22 years old, secretary, loved by her family, died alone in freezing water in an outhouse cesspool because someone decided she didn't deserve to live. Gone, but not forgotten.